If you've had any cryptid encounters that you'd like shared on here, email me at jttosstories@gmail.com. Story 1. Age 12 or so. Around 1983, my neighbor friends and I were having a yard camp out in a tent. Around 3-ish, one of the other kids woke up to go to the bathroom. He immediately woke me and the other kid up. He points down towards his dad's truck, which was about 40 feet from us. It was an early 80s Ford with a cap on the bed. We lived in the country, so there's just one street light about 75 feet behind the truck, by the neighbor's parking spot. Standing beside the back edge of the truck was something big and dark, head as high as the top of the truck cap. It was backlit by the streetlight, so we could not see facial details. 3/4 of its body was visible, and its left arm was not visible, as it was behind the truck. It was stationary, but making small fidgety movements. We all saw it. We were all terrified. We had a good, long look, as we were all sort of frozen with fear. We all just piled back into the tent and did not sleep the rest of the night. After a couple of minutes, we heard some brush rustle and the sound of some shifting rocks in the creek bed, then nothing else. Once it was light, we got the courage to leave the tent. We all agreed on what we saw. We went to the truck, and the rear window of the truck cap had a big smear in the dust. It was not an obvious handprint, but had characteristics that did not rule out handprint, and was larger than a paper plate. We had pizza the night before, and we were able to use a paper plate for comparison. We did not see footprints because of the gravel road. The creek bed had some rocks that seemed disturbed, but nothing that screamed unusual. No prints on the opposite bank. We told our dads, and they told us that we watched too much TV. Story 2. I need to clarify that while religious, I'm not particularly superstitious, and despite looking at and exploring many abandoned locations, the sites of horrific tragedies like old battlegrounds and massacres, I've never experienced or truly believed in anything paranormal or unexplainable. This story is the one and only experience I have that has made me even consider the possibility of otherworldly forces or things that I can't rationally explain. And if I hadn't experienced this personally, I would assume with a great deal of certainty that it's complete nonsense. For some context of the area I was in, my great-uncle owns a lot of land in northern Saskatchewan, Canada. Some of this was pasture that he uses for cattle, but half of one of his largest properties is fenced off and the cows can't go there. In the sectioned off, lactose-free zone, the entire area is densely populated with foliage. I mean, when I hunt, I almost only use game trails and small clearings, because a lot of the brush is too thick to get through without a machete. The ground itself is blotted with some small, steep hills towards the entrance to the property. There's one main dirt road that goes from a Texas gate at the entrance all the way back to the farthest side of the property. Coming off the road in the hill area, we have a camp. A camp consists of a camperized Atco trailer. Picture a big yellow sea can in front of the entrance, gated with barbed wire because sometimes my uncle will move his cattle to different fenced-off areas of the land. With my mother's pull-behind trailer that we can't pull anymore, sitting perpendicular to the Atco, and a tiny dinghy's 7D pull-behind that a family member gave me so I could have privacy at camp and not have to sleep in the same trailer as my mom. Needless to say, we spend a lot of time in the woods. And both my mom's and my door were facing the direction of the Atco, meaning I had a pseudo hallway between my door and my mom's wall, and finally, in front of the Atco trailer, we have a fire pit, and close next to it, in front of my mom's place, there is a table for food prep. Sorry for the lengthy explanation, but I feel like in order for the sequence of events to make sense, you'll need to understand where I was in the space, and maybe locations will make my reference points more clear for explaining later. We've always had a lot of wildlife, like big cats and bears that could harm people. I actually had to put a bear down that came into our camp and was far too comfortable with people not too long after. So, from a young age, I learned to recognize the sounds and sights around me, and while cautious, I'm rarely afraid of anything out there, especially given that I'm usually armed when I'm not with multiple people. The summer before last, we had a remarkably calm experience. There were hardly any critters we had to deal with, and it seemed the bears and pests were leaving us alone. No droppings, many small game trails had grown in, and the camp that usually took 2 days to set up was exactly how we had left it the previous trip. It was peaceful. It being summer, I filled the days with woodworking, fishing trips, and the occasional hike. looking for berries and for setting traps for rabbits, grouse, and other small game that could be prepared quickly over the fire with my family, but mostly came up unlucky. Regardless of the seeming lack of disturbances, we always were careful at night, making sure to have a bright light and keep lookout for anything. After the first week, we began hearing noises around the camp very late at night that would drive the dog insane all night, to the point we had to just keep her inside, but we never saw anything. It almost felt like whatever it was probing and checking out our camp nightly, but always staying far enough away and hidden enough that we could never see it with our spotlights. Then one night, just like any other, bar the eerie quietness that usually came around that time, I left my mother's camper a couple hours after the daylight had disappeared, with a lantern-style LED light, and as a rarity, I didn't have anything to defend myself. No gun, no bear spray, not even a knife. So I was a little more cautious and observant than usual, given that I felt more vulnerable. As I walked from the exit of my mom's camper, I looked around for a minute, scanning the tree line, and then began the loop around to my door. I panned as I walked from right to left from the entrance to the fire pit and then to the table. It was just there behind the table, not 20 feet away, and I saw a naked, extremely pale, almost gray, probably just because of the dark, lanky humanoid figure standing still and directly facing me. As it caught my gaze, I felt my heart drop and immediately went cold. Probably only stared for 3 seconds at most, but it felt like several minutes as my brain processed what I was seeing. It stood somewhere between 6.5 and 7.5 feet tall with low slumped shoulders, had a frail, thin body that reminded me of photos of people starving, both disproportionately long arms. I couldn't see the legs fully because of the table. What I could see looked like sinew and skin stretched over the leanest and thinnest body I'd ever seen. I know I might be sounding like a dramatic, but I couldn't describe the primal fear and shock that came over me. It was a combination of the feeling you get being threatened at gunpoint and hearing someone stalk you in the woods, but ramped up to the point where I could barely think. I couldn't make out many details in the face, but the light cast small shadows on it that made it look like it had shallow features, similar to a nose and lips and eye sockets that were smoothed down, almost like a crossbreed of Voldemort and Slenderman. I ran like my life depended on it, and frankly I thought it might have. Last few feet to my door. Once inside, I grabbed the shotgun, stuffed several shells in my pocket, loaded the gun, and aimed it at the door. I sat in silence, with the hammer back, waiting for the doorknob to turn, for the frosted glass to break. I sat and waited for hours into the early morning, expecting to see or hear something, but I never did. Not even any foliage moving or items moving. Eventually, on 4 a.m., I lowered my guard, propped the shotgun next to my bed, and hesitantly went to sleep. When I woke up, I hardly believed what I'd seen the night before. I was around the area to see if there were any shapes or items that I might have mistaken and warped in my mind into the creature, but the only thing in the area I saw was a table with some pots and pans that were blackened from the fire. I'm still not quite sure what to make of it, but I do have some ideas from what I witnessed. Given the fact that I believe it was stalking us and stalking our camp for several nights, along with positioning itself between me and my mother's camper, directly in front of the path that I took every night, leads me to believe that it had some level of intelligence, comparable to a person laying a trap or setting something up. As I mentioned, I looked around after exiting my mother's camper, and never heard anything, which tells me it was either waiting there, watching, or it's so incredibly quiet that I never heard it move even a leaf, which wouldn't line up with us hearing the disturbances from the previous nights. Also left as quietly as it appeared, which leaves 3 options. Either it went out of its way to use the same road entering the camp that a person would for convenience, silently crept out through the game trails, or it didn't wait until after I lowered my guard and my adrenaline died down. I'm honestly not sure which option is more likely or more terrifying. I'm not really sure what I saw, but I know it wasn't human. The photos and drawings of these crawlers remind me a great deal of it, so I thought I'd share. Maybe one of you could enlighten me as to what it could have been, or its intents, or provide an explanation as to its behavior.